Hey, my name is Shelly, and this is my fall TBR. I cannot believe how fast time has gone. The summer just blew right past me. Time is weird. Time is funny. I have a huge pile of books that I really want to get to this fall. For me, fall feels like cozy epic fantasies, so I have a ton of those. Will I read all these books? Probably not, but I would be happy if I got to a big chunk of them. Without further to say, let's get started. Although I want to focus mainly on big epic fantasies for the rest of the year, I do have some sci-fis to pepper in here and there, so let's talk about those. Earlier this year, I read Ascension by Jeff Vandermeer, and because Book Outlet had a ton of them for like really cheap, I grabbed a ton of his backlist, including Borne. From what I know, this is a standalone, and from what I've heard, it also kind of reads more on the youthful side, like YA. Like most of these books I'm going to talk about today, I don't know the synopsis of a lot of these, but I do know that this is about a woman who finds this weird creature and adopts it. And I've heard it's very like cute and adorable, and it's just a very touching story. I don't know, don't quote me if that's not true, but that's just what I've heard from other people's reviews. So I'm really excited to get to this because it seems like something that I would really love to read physically. And this cover, sorry, my light's in the way. This cover is just, I love, like the more you look at it, the more you see. So I will be reading this physically by the end of the year. Another book that I would like to get to is Alien Clay. Like I have been wanting to jump back into Adrian Tchaikovsky for quite some time now. I've been dragging my feet for some reason. Although Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of my favorite authors, I find that sometimes his work does miss the mark for me. Some of it hits it, but some of it misses. And I'm hoping that this is a hit because it is a standalone. At least for me, that's where I find Adrian Tchaikovsky shines, is in his standalone. So I'm very excited to get to this. Again, don't know much about it, but it is sci-fi. It takes place on an alien world, hence the name Alien Clay. My library has an audiobook copy of it, so I will be listening to the audiobook. Another book that I've been meaning to get to for quite some time is the Shadow and Claw book. This is the bind-up of the first two books of the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I have heard that this is like, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard this from a couple people that he's like the grandfather of grim dark. Like this is a grim dark sci-fantasy kind of book, more leaning on fantasy with a heavy dose of sci-fi. Yeah, it's grim dark about an executioner, sci-fantasy, and that's all it takes to sell me on this. Because this comes heavily recommended by so many people that I respect, I really feel like I need to check this book out and to see what everybody's talking about, because as it says, it is an essential sci-fantasy book. I will be listening to this via audio. The next book I want to talk about bridges sci-fi fantasy, much like Shadow and Claw did, and that is the book that broke the world by Mark Lawrence. This is the second book in the Library trilogy. First book in the series, The Book That Wouldn't Burn, was probably one of my favorite books of last year. And for some reason, I've had this book since it came out. Like I literally pre-ordered it, it got to my door, and it's been sitting on my shelf since. I attempted to read it, but I just wasn't in the mood. So I really want to read it by the end of the year because the third book is coming out, I believe, in the first quarter of 2025. I can't say much about this book because it is the sequel, but if you like library settings and a weird paced plot line, I highly recommend checking out the series. I know it is not for everybody. I fully understand it, but I had a really great time reading the first book. I've heard that Mark Lawrence wrote all three books at once, so I really hope that I love this book and the third book will really stick the landing. Now we're getting into the fantasy TBR part. And the first book that I want to finish by the end of the year is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. I would actually love to read the entire First Law series by the time his new book comes out. I know it has nothing to do with it, but I do want to. It's a goal of mine. I have plans to read it with Taylor from Read Between the Pages, but life has been busy for both of us, so I'm hoping that we will get our schedules together and are able to read this together. So when I read The Blade itself a couple years ago, I'm like, I don't get it. I get he's good, but then I continued on with the series, and I'm so freaking glad that I did. This one just really levels up his writing abilities and his character development. So I'm very excited to get to this and to the rest of the series, hopefully within the next 6 months. So the next books I want to talk about are the next two books in the Kate Daniels series. This is an urban fantasy series. It's urban fantasy, but it's post-apocalyptic. So instead of werewolves, you have shapeshifters who can shapeshift into other animals, and there's different like animal tribes, and there's gods, and like everything you could possibly think of in an urban fantasy, but this takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. And it is incredibly funny. That's all I have to say. I've been talking about this series for the longest time. Anyways, so I will be continuing with book, I can't remember, I think it's 7 and 8. I do hope to read the rest of the series, but at this point, I don't know, because I am reading it with my friend V, and life has been busy for both of us. So we're just trying to coordinate our schedules so we can read it. But essentially, I will be reading these 2 for sure by the end of the year. Okay, another book is The High King's Tomb by Kristen Britton. This is the 3rd book in the Green Riders series. I read the first 2 this summer, and I really, really loved Green Rider, the first one. The second one, I was iffy on. There was a few things that I have some problems with, and one being the main love interest that has been introduced. Although it is more epic fantasy than it is a romantic fantasy, there are romantic elements in it. With that said, I really hated said romance, and although the ending of book 2 kind of left it like, oh, things could change, I have a feeling that it's just not going to, and it's just... yeah, I am giving it this book to decide whether or not I want to continue on with the series. I mentioned that to one of my friends, and they said if you don't like Green Rider, like if it doesn't work out for you, they highly recommend checking out Arrows and Queens by Mercedes Lackey. I think this is the first book in the Valdemir series, which I had no idea was like 38 books long and still going. Like, what? I don't know how I've been like living under a rock and not have known about this author for so long. It boggles my mind. But I was told that if I don't like Green Rider, to check out this series because it has the same feel, but this series, in their opinion, or actually a lot of people's opinion, is better. Plus there's more, because although the series is long, it's like kind of like Discworld, where it's broken up between a lot of different series, and you can just kind of pick and choose which series you want to read. Although it is overwhelming, I was told by somebody who's read a lot of the series to start with this book, which is the first book in the Herald of Valdemir. So my library actually has an audiobook copy of this, so I will be reading it via audio if The High Tomb leaves me disappointed. Or I might just pick it up anyways, because I am curious and a lot of people have been reading it lately. So maybe I'm just gonna jump on that bandwagon. So the next book I want to talk about is another sequel. I recently reread The Shadows of the Gods in my last reading wrap-up. I really enjoyed it. There were a couple of things that I had some issues with, but the overall story and the Viking world were just so good that I really want to continue on, and I want to see where these characters go, because I was getting really attached to these characters. So I'm very excited / scared to see where John Gwynne takes us with this next book, because I have read his previous series, and I'm blanking on the name, The Faithful and the Fallen, it's right there, and I know he is not nice to his characters, so I am scared. The 3rd book actually comes out in October. I don't think I will be able to read this book before the sequel comes out, but I do plan to read at least this book or both of them by the end of the year. 2 books will be pure audio. I just have their audiobooks for them. And the first one is The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. And I have been recommended this by a friend on Discord, even though I know it's like a steampunk murder mystery, which is not really my thing. They're like, you should check it out. I think you'll really like it. It's one of my favorite series. It is so good. It is more than meets the eye, kind of. So I do want to check out the audiobook. Plus, they said that it's one of the best audiobooks they've ever listened to. So I mean, like, how could I go wrong with such a recommendation? So I have the audiobook, so I will be listening to this at some point this fall. And the next audiobook I want to talk about is the next Dungeon Crawler Carl book. Because I have so many epic fantasies that I want to get to, I think it's a nice like palate cleanser in between, even though they're very lengthy audiobooks. It's just, I think they go by so fast because it's so fun and there's so much happening. And I think the 7th book is coming out in October at some point, so it is kind of like the perfect time to get to the series. I can't remember the name of the actual title because I don't have it with me, so I'll just put it here. So I will be listening to that this fall for sure. This book has been on my TBR for quite some time, almost a year, And I am not entirely sure why I haven't read it. Maybe because like last year I read so much Sanderson. I was Sandersoned out and I needed a break. So I had a bit of a break, and I actually don't even remember the last Sanderson book I read. I think it was The Lost Metal. I think I finished The Lost Metal earlier this year, but I can't remember. I've heard a lot of mixed things about this book, and I'm not sure where I'll fall in my thoughts on it. And I did hear from Sanderson himself that you should be reading this book before Stormlight 4, Wind and Truth comes out in December. So I do want to read it before December, and it is a shorter book, and I have the audio. And judging by the artwork alone and the whole look of this book, I think I'm gonna like it. So I am definitely, this is like a 100%, I'm reading this by the end of the year. The next book I want to talk about is a big old doozy, and that is my entire reread of Stormlight. Spoiler alert for my next recent reads wrap up. I'm currently reading The Way of Kings right now via audiobook, and I'm just so freaking happy to get back into this world. Like, you have no idea how happy I've been struggling with books like epic fantasies lately. I just feel like they're just missing the mark for me. But Stormlight it just works so perfectly. Once I finish listening to The Way of Kings, I'm going to listen to a different book just to break it up, and then I'm going to jump back in with Words of Radiance, and then hopefully, as the plan goes, I'm going to reread the entire Stormlight series by the end of the year. I don't know if that's going to happen. At least these two, the first two for sure. And then obviously, I'm going to be reading Wind and Truth when it comes out. Like, that day it comes out, I'm going to be like, cancel all my plans. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to be reading that. For me, I feel like the reread of the entire series is more important to me than some of these other books. And I feel so bad for the other books because all books are precious. But this is like my favorite series. So, I mean, obviously I'm going to prioritize it. So I will be rereading this for sure this fall. So the last two I want to talk about are maybes. And that is if I manage to read all of Stormlight and all of these books, or at least a fraction of these books. I have been feeling epic fantasy, and I have been wanting to get back into some of the series that I started a couple years ago and I DNF'd or just stopped and got distracted from. And the first one being The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan. Now this is a big one. This is a big one because I actually made the decision to DNF Wheel of Time. The reason why I decided to DNF it was because I know that some romantic plot lines happen, and I was not cool with that. But I think that maybe I'll just try to turn a blind eye to it, I guess. I don't know. So then I did some little bit more research on it, and like the world building and like the idea behind Wheel of Time and the magic system and all that stuff, it just speaks to me on a level that like I really am interested in. Like I know he gets a lot of inspiration from different religions, like that is like heavily in it, and I find religions so fascinating. So I was able to get a copy of the Rosemary Pike audiobook, and I listened to the first I listened to the sample of it, and she is so good, like so good, because I think I read the first two with the old audiobook, which is Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. And they're the same audiobook narrators that do Stormlight. So for me, they are Stormlight. So it kind of confused me. The fact that like I can listen to it now with Rosemary Pike is amazing to me. So I'm going to be doing that. Unfortunately, I think there's only 4 books that she's done so far, but I believe she's going to do them all. So I will be taking my time with Wheel of Time. So the last book that I may get to is A Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. I probably have had this on one of my TBRs in the past, and I've just kept pushing it back. The Live Ship Traders is one of my favorite series of all time, but the rest of the Realm of Elderlings from like Fitz perspective just didn't really work for me. But I want to continue on, and I want to see why it's everybody's favorite. And I do enjoy the series, and I do enjoy her writing style. It's just, Fitz just kind of got under my skin a little bit. So yeah, it's been years. So I feel like enough time has passed that I really need to get into it, but I think I remember enough of it to not have to reread. This is a big maybe, but if it doesn't happen this year, I do want to prioritize it for early next year. That's a lot of books. I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to be able to get to all these books, but at least a good chunk. And, you know, if I don't get to them, then I'll just have to pass on to the next year. All my socials are down below, Instagram, Goodreads, and my Discord. Highly recommend checking them out. If you like this video, think about liking and subscribing. And thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day. Bye!